Are you sure this is the item you want me to hide, Shelly?
Gideon, my twin brother, looked at me with a raised eyebrow. Yeah, sure. Why not? I handed over the old tattered jewelry box that Grandma left for me in her will. We couldn't get the box open because there wasn't a key, so why not? Gideon handed me his Xbox.
Okay, so, you know the rules. The person who figures out the riddle and gets back their item first will forever be dubbed the riddle champion. Remember, you're only allowed to hide the items in the amusement park, home, or at school.
Gideon and I shook on it. We went our separate ways, prepared our riddles, and hid the items. When Grandma left me this box, she told me that I should keep the box safe until the time was right. Little did I know that the game with Gideon was about to ruin my life. Hey, my name is Shelly. If you want to find out how this game ruined my life, watch the rest of this video. I don't want you to make the same mistake I did. Gideon and I have a great bond, but in spite of this, we have always been competitive with each other, pushing each other and ourselves to be the best at what we do. The next day, Gideon and I handed each other a piece of paper enclosed with the riddle. We eyed each other, shook hands to seal the bet, and we headed to our rooms. I opened the piece of paper and on it was written, "Rip me off quick so I no longer hide. Once that is done, you'll see what's concealed inside." It has to be a package, I shouted as I ran down to my parents' office. Yesterday, they received a few packages. It must be one of those, I thought. I burst into the office and began the search for the packages. After searching for a few minutes, the only package I saw was in the cupboard, all the way at the top. I dragged Dad's chair from behind his desk and placed it in front of the cupboard. I tiptoed to reach the package. Almost got it. I stretched my fingers as far as they could go. My fingertips touched the package. I just needed to stretch a bit more. Suddenly, the office door opened and Dad's voice startled me.
Shelly, Mom said dinner is ready.
The chair wobbled below me and I crashed to the floor. Ouch. I rubbed my shoulder as I struggled to a sitting position. Dad rushed over to help.
Shelly, what in the world were you doing?
I was trying to get that package up there. I nodded towards the package.
Why? That's your mother's birthday gift. Why do you want that?
Oh, Dad helped me to my feet.
Are you and Gideon up to something?
Dad raised an inquisitive eyebrow. Well, maybe. I rolled my shoulders. Dad shook his head.
We'll talk about it later. Let's go to dinner before Mom punishes both of us for being late.
That night before going to bed, Gideon knocked on my door.
How's your shoulder?
He asked as he walked in. How did you know about that?
I sensed it. It's a twin thing.
He looked at me seriously before his mouth turned into a smile.
No, Dad told me about it.
I tossed a pillow at Gideon. It's a bit sore, but I'll be okay. Are you any closer to figuring out your riddle?
Almost.
He grinned.
I'll find my Xbox before you find Grandma's jewelry box.
You wish. Gideon laughed and exited my room. I was going to beat Gideon and become the riddle champion no matter what. 3 days passed and my hopes on becoming the riddle champion shattered as Gideon walked into my room with his Xbox.
Hey, you want to play a game?
I rolled my eyes.
You know what this means, right? I am the riddle champion.
Gideon cupped his hands by his mouth and made cheering noises as he ran up and down my room. I don't know what's worse, you winning or me having to listen to you gloat. Gideon playfully put me in a headlock and messed up my hair. I pushed him off and he landed on my bed. Out of breath, he asked,
Do you want me to tell you where the jewelry box is?
No, I'll find it by myself, thank you very much.
You know I won, right?
I will not be known for not being able to figure out one of your silly little riddles.
Okay, suit yourself.
Gideon picked up his Xbox and headed to the door. He looked over his shoulder and taunted me.
If you need me, I'll be in the living room playing with this bad boy.
I groaned and dove on my bed, disappointed. Over the next 2 weeks, I was obsessed with any package that came to the house. Anything that held the shape of my jewelry box was torn open. This often led me to getting stern stares from my parents. However, I didn't mind. I needed to figure out where Gideon placed my jewelry box. I even searched the amusement park. The only place I did not search was school. That was next on my list. Over the next few days, my eyes searched for clues in anything that was wrapped like a package. I thought maybe Mr. Gilks, the principal's office, was worth searching. When Mrs. Goddard told me that Mr. Gilks did not come in that day, I took the opportunity to have a look around. I snuck into his office and kept low as I began my search. In one corner of the office on a wooden table were a few brown paper packages. As I began to remove the paper, someone cleared their throat behind me, and I froze.
Shelly Watson, do I dare ask what you're doing?
I slowly turned around and smiled at Mr. Gilks weakly. Good morning, sir. I didn't know you were coming to school today. I stood up slowly.
I'm sorry to disappoint you. Meet me in detention at 3 p.m. room 301. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do.
With my head down, I quickly exited Mr. Gilk's office. After school, I met Mr. Gilk's in detention. I was finally released at 5 p.m. I hurried home so I wouldn't have to explain to Mom why I was late for dinner at 6 p.m.
Where have you been?
Gideon whispered to me as soon as I walked through the door. I grabbed his hand and dragged him to my room. I closed the door before I spoke. I was in detention.
What? Why?
Gideon searched my eyes for answers. Well, I rubbed the back of my neck. I was searching for clues from your riddle. Gideon hollered and held his stomach.
I can't believe you thought I would hide the jewelry box in Mr. Gilk's office. We're almost out of high school. A recommendation from Mr. Gilk's to colleges is needed. I'm not about to mess that up by hiding the box there.
Gideon pressed his hands lovingly on my shoulders as he looked into my eyes.
Come on, Shelley. Let me tell you where the box is. I promise not to hold it against you.
I shook my head profusely. I'll figure it out. That night after dinner, I plastered sticky notes on my bedroom wall with all the places I searched and places that I planned on searching in the future. Mom, Dad, and even Gideon became worried about me as all I did in my spare time was ponder over the riddle. I lost weight, and nothing else seemed to matter, not even the acceptance letter from NIB College where Gideon and I applied. I groaned inwardly when Mom and Dad decided to take us to dinner the following night. I needed to figure out this riddle. I didn't have time to go to dinner. Every afternoon, Gideon and I met outside the school gates and headed home together.
Hey!
Gideon said as he approached me.
Coach said I have to stay back and practice for a few hours for the big game this weekend. Tell Mom not to worry and I'll be home in time to go for dinner.
He was about to walk away when he looked at me.
Your jewelry box is in the...
I placed my hand over my ears and sang loudly until Gideon's lips no longer moved. I snapped. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I can't figure out your silly little riddle? I told you I wanted to figure it out on my own, and I will. I stormed off. As I walked home, I realized that I had overreacted, and maybe I should go back and apologize to Gideon. I shrugged it off. I'll talk with him later as soon as he gets home. Little did I know that I would regret that decision for the rest of my life. My parents and I sat around, already dressed for dinner, waiting for Gideon to come home. At 6 p.m., he called from Coach Raymond's phone and said practice ran late and he would be home in 30 minutes. That was an hour ago. Suddenly, I screamed out and hunched over in pain.
Shelly!
Mom rushed over to me.
What's wrong?
I moaned. I'm not sure. I don't feel so good. My head is pounding. Dad picked me up and carried me to my bedroom and placed me on the bed.
I'll get you something for the headache.
I nodded as Dad pulled the covers over me before he exited my room. I must have drifted off to sleep since I jumped up to a blood-curdling scream. It took me a while to realize that the scream came from my mother. I dashed to the living room where Dad was comforting Mom, who clutched the phone in her hands. Dad, what's going on? Mom looked at me.
It's Gideon. He's been in an accident.
I sank to the floor. A horrified look on my face, but no sound came out. Dad helped Mom and I to the car and he drove us to the hospital. When we got there, Dr. Hollis told us that Gideon received severe lacerations to his head and he was in a coma. While Mom and Dad spoke to Dr. Gideon, I entered Gideon's room. He looked pale and deathly still. His head was wrapped with bandages and a long tube ran from his arm to a machine next to the bed. I sat on the chair next to the bed and held his hand. I fought through the tears as I apologized to Gideon about what had happened earlier. Gideon was always there. What was I supposed to do now without my best friend? How was I supposed to go off to college without him? Over the next few weeks, things changed drastically in our household. Where there was once laughter and joy, now there was uncertainty and silence. Many nights I sat in bed, wishing it were me in the hospital and not Gideon. I completely forgot about the riddle and spent my afternoons at Gideon's bedside. One night, Mom got a call from the hospital. Gideon was awake. Dad drove us to the hospital. As soon as Dad pulled into the parking lot of the hospital, I hopped out of the car and ran to Gideon's room, not caring who I knocked over on the way there. Gideon! I threw my arms around him as soon as I entered his room. My tears fell against his shoulders. He held me tightly.
I'm okay, Shelley.
The car accident changed Gideon. The last year of his life was completely wiped from his memory, which meant that even if he wanted to tell me where the jewelry box was, the memory of him hiding it was lost. Change was hard. But it was even harder seeing my outgoing brother turn into a shell of himself. He was more reserved and competing no longer satisfied him. Without Gideon, competing was no longer fun for me either, and we both dropped out of all the sporting clubs in which we excelled. That year, we didn't even celebrate Christmas. Mom and Dad thought it was in Gideon's best interest if he went to a college closer to home. While NIB was my college of choice, I couldn't see myself going to school without Gideon, so I told my parents that I planned to go to whichever college they placed Gideon. Our 18th birthday was soon upon us. Gideon and I always thought about all the things we would do once we reached 18. However, on this day we had a quiet lunch at home before Mom and Dad drove us to Mrs. Pollard's office, the family lawyer.
I'm so glad you could make it.
Mrs. Pollard nodded to Gideon and I as we sat in the chairs opposite her desk. She continued,
According to your grandma's will, she needed to know that both of you were responsible and can be trusted before a lot was given to you.
Gideon and I shared a look.
Do you have the jewelry box your grandma left you?
I shook my head. Mrs. Pollard sighed as she held a key in her hand.
Without the box, I'm not allowed to hand over the inheritance that your grandma left you. Within the jewelry box is a letter and the key for a safe where your inheritance is kept.
As we drove home from Mrs. Pollard's, the silence in the car was intense. I squeezed Gideon's hand. We are fine without Grandma's inheritance. Don't worry about it. Soon another Christmas rolled around, and this year we decided to go all out. It was Christmas Eve when Mom ran out of wrapping paper.
There should be a box of wrapping paper in the basement. Can you get it for me, Shelley?
I nodded and quickly found the cardboard box marked wrapping paper in the basement. I lifted the box from the shelf. It felt a bit heavy for just paper. I shook the box. There was something in there. My breath froze in my throat as I opened the cardboard box slowly. There it was. Grandma's jewelry box. Gideon! Gideon! I grabbed the box and ran up to his room.
What's the matter, Shelley? Is something wrong?
I found it! I found Grandma's jewelry box! I jumped gleefully. That afternoon, Mom called Mrs. Pollard, who was kind enough to come over to the house. We unlocked the box and followed Grandma's instructions to the safety box and the inheritance. Grandma left Gideon and I her horse farm in 𝗕𝗔𝗦𝗬𝗑, where Mom grew up, and $50,000 each. The letter stated that as soon as Gideon and I got a degree, we could claim for the other $100,000. Gideon and I decided to do counseling degrees and use horse therapy as a method of therapy for emotional, physical, and mental conditions. I think Grandma would be proud, don't you?
Hi, Mark. I'm Mr. Bellamy, your mom's brother. I'm really sorry about your parents. As your uncle, I'm here to comfort you and let you know that I'll take care of you.
My parents had died 2 weeks earlier, and we were sitting at the funeral service. Mom always talked about her big brother, Uncle Bellamy, but for some reason, we never visited him. Now, here he was, probably the only family I had left after my parents' tragic boating accident. I tried my best to be polite to him, but the truth is, I was not in the mood to talk to anyone. After the funeral, Uncle Bellamy and his wife Terry helped me pack. They assured me that everything was going to be fine. What about Mom and Dad's stuff?
I'll take care of that, but if there's anything you need, pack it.
A few hours later, we boarded a plane and I left my life behind. That was a year ago, on one of the worst days of my life. Before I tell you what happened to me after that, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. We have a lot of cool and fun stuff for you to watch. Remember to hit the notification bell so that you're first to watch more exciting videos like this one. The Bellamys lived in a huge estate. They owned the biggest hotel in town, so money was not a problem for them. Mrs. Bellamy managed the hotel and she spent almost all her time there. She was an overly stern lady and seemed to control everything around the house. I did my best to stay out of her way. My uncle, on the other hand, rarely left home. He had a home office, but I had no idea what he did there. I saw people come and go, most of them men in expensive-looking dark suits and luxurious cars. I never dared ask him what he did for a living. He also held numerous meetings at home with these men. The weird thing about these meetings, though, was that they were all held behind closed doors and only at night. Whenever these meetings took place, my uncle would order me not to leave my room until morning. One night during one of my uncle's meetings, curiosity got the better of me. I creeped out of bed and walked towards where the meeting was taking place. I quietly stood by the door and tried to eavesdrop.
They've already dispatched the cargo. I already spoke to our client, and he's ready to receive it at the usual time and place. We're bagging a good sum this time, fellas.
I listened for a few minutes, but none of what was said made sense to me, so I turned to go back to my room.
What was that? I think someone is outside the door.
The door swung open and I froze. A man I'd never seen before stood in front of me. He looked intimidatingly huge and was, as expected, wearing a black suit.
Bellamy, I thought you said this kid would not cause any trouble.
The man was chewing a toothpick like it was his last meal. My uncle came running out of the room.
Mark, I told you never to leave your room when I have business meetings here.
I was curious. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. I was trembling under the huge man's stare.
Go to sleep immediately. I'll know what to do with you tomorrow morning.
I barely slept that night, knowing that coming morning, I'd have to face my uncle and probably his wife. Breakfast was quiet. Uncle Bellamy didn't say anything about the previous night. I thought I'd gotten away with disobeying him. How naive of me. That evening after school, I found him and his wife waiting for me in the living room.
Mark, we've been taking care of you for 1 year now. I'm sorry to tell you that the money we use to cater for your education is exhausted. You'll have to start working to pay your school fees. You can continue staying here, though. We'll provide shelter.
Don't you dare tell anyone about this, or else we'll just have to kick you out for being ungrateful.
I was startled. Why would my uncle demand that I pay my fees with all his riches? I was sure that this was him punishing me for eavesdropping. That week, I found a job in a coffee shop nearby and began working a few hours after school to manage my fees. My grades began deteriorating noticeably due to exhaustion and stress. However, I was careful not to mention anything to anyone to avoid being kicked out. I wore designer clothes to school and had all the latest gadgets, phones, tablets, and laptops. I drove my uncle's sports car to work and school. He demanded that I use it to portray that he took good care of me. I wouldn't say I liked the hypocrisy, but had to play by his rules. Students craved to be associated with me because from the looks of things, I was stinking rich. Little did they know the situation at home. One evening after school, Uncle Bellamy walked into my room.
Your principal called me today. He says that you have a fee balance. What kind of shame are you subjecting me to? I'm providing everything for you. The least you can do is pay your school fees.
I'm sorry, but my pay at the coffee shop isn't enough to cover my school fees. I'm trying my best. Maybe I can get another job. Days later, my aunt informed me that she had a janitor's position for me at the hotel.
We'll pay you enough to cover your school fees. Also, I have a room for you there. You will spend nights there from now on. You'll be preparing for school in the morning at the hotel.
Indirectly, I knew they were kicking me out so I could be far away from them and whatever deals my uncle was making at the house. I began juggling between school and work at the hotel. After school, I'd attend my night shift and only get a maximum of 3 hours of sleep. During the day, I seemed very well polished and loaded with money, but I would fall back to being the janitor at night. One day, the hotel manager informed me that all rooms had been occupied and no room was left for me to spend the night. I decided to go to the estate and sleep after my shift.
What are you doing here?
My aunt nearly spat at me when I walked into the house. The hotel rooms were all occupied. I figured I'd come home to rest before waking up for school.
This is no longer your home. There's a reason we asked you to spend the nights at the hotel, Mark. Go back.
That day, I realized that I was homeless. I went back to the hotel, exhausted. From that night, whenever the hotel was full, I was forced to sleep on the hotel's restaurant seats and other times in the kitchen. I'd prepare for school in the morning and act like nothing was happening. When my uncle had a family or business event, he ensured I was present and pretended to cater to my needs. He even bought me new clothes for such events. My aunt would also act to love me and called me her son. One evening while on my usual janitorial duty, something on TV caught my attention. A photo of a man filled the screen, with the words "Wanted" written below his image. He looked familiar, and I took a keen look trying to recollect where I'd seen him before. I dropped my bucket and mop in utter shock. This was the same man I saw at Uncle Bellamy's the night they caught me eavesdropping. I'd recognize that intimidating stare anywhere. The poster said his name was Johnny Soprano. Interestingly, there was a $1 million reward for information leading to the man's arrest. I quickly took out my phone and wrote down the contact information provided on the screen. I, however, didn't make the phone call out of fear. Every day for the next week, I looked at the phone number but never made the call. Days passed by and life at the hotel got harder. I thought about the $1 million reward. All I had to do was make the call and I'd get the money. I could use it to get back to my hometown and start a new life. I eventually gathered enough courage and called the number. "Hi, this is Mark. I know where you can find Johnny Soprano." I felt like my heart was stuck in my throat.
How do you know him?
A serious-sounding lady asked. "I saw him at my uncle's home. I think he's one of my uncle's business associates, and they often hold meetings at my uncle's home."
And what's your uncle's name? And where does he live?
I answered all her questions nervously. "But please don't tell my uncle I told you this. I'm already in trouble with him."
Be calm. You have done the right thing, Mark. Thank you for the information and for the courage to call. We will take it from here. Also, we advise you to be careful. Mr. Soprano is a very dangerous man. Stay safe, and in case of anything, don't hesitate to call us. As soon as an arrest is made, you'll be contacted regarding the reward money.
Okay, thank you. I'll be careful. Days passed by and I didn't hear from the lady or the FBI. I began wondering whether my call was any help at all. That weekend, I received a call from my aunt.
Hey Mark, we're hosting a party at home tomorrow, and we'd like you to be present. Your uncle has already ordered your suit for the event, so don't bother looking for an outfit.
Okay, I'll be there. I had so many thoughts after that call. Had my uncle found out about my call to the FBI? If yes, what would he do to me when I showed up at his house? Was the party a trap for me? I quickly dismissed that. It couldn't be a trap. He didn't need to host a party to capture me. All he had to do was come to the hotel and find me. Then I'd never be seen or heard from again. I was going crazy. Before I could stop myself, I dialed the FBI tip line number again.
Good evening, Mark. What can I do for you?
How could you be so calm? I was sweating through my shirt. I think my uncle knows. His wife just called to invite me to a party at their house tomorrow. Why haven't you arrested Johnny yet? Is my uncle a bad guy? What?
Mark, stop talking. We're aware of the party. Also be careful what you say on the phone from now on. Someone could be listening.
What? They know I'm talking to you? I knew I shouldn't have called you. I have to leave town now.
Please don't do that. We don't want your uncle to suspect anything. We need you to attend the party and act normally.
But what if—
Don't worry, Mark. Nothing will happen to you.
Easy for her to say. She wasn't the one betraying a man so dangerous he was wanted by the FBI. On the day of the party, I showed up at my uncle's home. I was more on the lookout for Johnny than I was interested in the party. I didn't see him anywhere, so I relaxed and began to enjoy myself.
Johnny, I'm so glad you could make it.
At the sound of my uncle's voice, I turned around fast, and there he was. The man who, for the last few days, was the main character in my nightmares.
You always throw the best parties, Bellamy. How could I miss it?
Both men clapped each other's shoulders and laughed. The party was outside, so I discreetly walked into the house, which was mostly empty except for the people my uncle hired to cater for the party. I looked for an empty room and called the tip line number again. "He's here," I whispered.
We know. Our agents are already at the house, and they've made a positive identification. It's almost over, Mark.
I was so relieved. Okay, thank you. I was hit hard on the back of my head and fell. I looked up at my attacker and was shocked to see my aunt standing there, a golf club in her hand.
I knew you were trouble from the first day you came to live with us. Bellamy should have just left you behind like I asked him to,
she said sternly. She grabbed my phone and dragged me towards the closet, threw me in and locked the closet door. She left the room and banged the door behind her. I pushed the closet door so hard, but it didn't budge, so I sat in there and waited for my fate. About an hour later, the closet door swung open and I closed my eyes in fear. Please don't hurt me.
Hello, Mark. Please come with me.
I opened my eyes at the sound of the familiar voice. Principal Evans? I looked at my school principal in confusion. Not only was he at my uncle's house, he was wearing a jacket with FBI written in big yellow letters. I don't understand.
I know this is confusing to you, but I'll answer your questions as soon as you're safe.
Mr. Evans and another lady dressed similarly led me outside the house to one of the many cars outside. As we left the estate, I tried to get a glimpse of my uncle and aunt, but I didn't see them. Mr. Evans told me that they'd been arrested together with Johnny and several others at the party. He also told me that he was an undercover agent.
We've been investigating your uncle for months, but we never knew he was doing deals with Johnny.
So what will happen now?
For starters, you're going to leave town. Arrangements are being made as we speak.
Where will I go?
That's a secret. Nobody can know, not even me.
All my uncle and aunt's property was seized, and they lost everything under their name. Before I left town, Mr. Evans told me that they'd be going to jail for a long time. Over the next few weeks, my life was like a movie. I was given a new identity and moved to a different city. I wish I could tell you where, but for my own safety, I can't. Oh, I was also $1 million richer.